A few years ago, an apology letter was posted online and addressed to the unknown would-be assailant. It read, "To the guy who tried to mug me the night before last. I was the guy wearing the black jacket that you demanded I hand over shortly after you pulled a knife on me and my girlfriend and threatened our lives. I can only hope that you somehow come across this rather important message. First, I'd like to apologize for your embarrassment. You probably didn't know that I had a concealed weapon under my jacket. Obviously, you agree that it's a very intimidating weapon. And I know it probably wasn't fun walking back to wherever you'd come from. And I'm sure it was even worse walking barefoot since I made you leave your shoes, your cell phone, and your wallet with me. I did this to prevent you from calling or running to your buddies to come help mug us again. I apologize for maxing out your credit card. I used it to fill my gas tank as well as 4 other vehicles at the gas station. And the guy with the big motorhome, well, he took 150 gallons and he was extremely grateful. I apologize for giving your shoes to a homeless guy along with all the cash in your wallet. But you know, it made his day. I apologize that after I went through your contact list in your cell phone, I called your mother, or mommy, as you had her listed in your cell. I explained the entire situation to her and what you attempted to do. I hope, for your sake, she wasn't serious when she said she will break every bone in your body when you return home. I also apologize for what I did next, because I should have left it at that, but I was still very upset that you pulled a knife out on my girlfriend. So I made 2 threatening phone calls to the DA's office and 1 to the FBI, informing them that the governor might be my possible target. The FBI guy was really intense, and we had a very long chat. I guess that's so he could trace your number. Well, I'm really sorry for all the trouble I probably caused you, because in retrospect, I guess my actions probably will result in more problems for you. Probably more problems than you caused me to experience. Anyway, I wish you well as you try to sort through some of these rather immediate pressing issues. And I can only hope that you have the opportunity to reflect upon and perhaps reconsider the career path you've chosen to pursue in your life. Thoughtfully yours, Alex. Well, after this letter was posted online, the website host reached out to the author, Alex, and Alex explained that the letter was not real and was the result of a wild revenge fantasy he had after someone broke into his apartment. He claimed writing and posting the letter online was therapeutic. It helped him feel better after he imagined he was able to right the wrong he suffered. According to Snopes.com, even when people discovered the letter was not authentic, it remained popular as it spread across the web. These stories of revenge seem to touch something deep within us, appealing to our sense of fairness, especially when the bad doer gets what's coming to them, like the mega popular Marvel Avengers film, when the Incredible Hulk defeats Loki by smashing him around like a rag doll. Or in the film Star Wars, when Luke attempts to avenge his father's death against Darth Vader. Or in the film Taken, when Liam Neeson says, "I have a set of skills. A set of skills I will track you down. I will find you, and I will kill you." All because his daughter was kidnapped. And of course, who can forget the film The Princess Bride, when Inigo Montoya finally confronts his father's killing, saying, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." Oh yeah. There seems to be something attractive about revenge fantasies, like the Old Testament accounts of when the Hebrews escaped from Egypt and all the Egyptians drowned, or when Esther and her people were spared and her antagonist was killed. Some psychologists suggest that these revenge fantasies aid in our healing, claiming that because the victim felt powerless, it helped that they were able to fantasize being able to have revenge. Oh, sweet revenge. And imagining the ability to have revenge acts as a buffer against the negative feelings that are associated with victimization. And it's possible we've all entertained some type of revenge fantasy at one time or another after experiencing an injustice. Like imagining the ways to get back at the idiot who hit us while we were parked at a stop sign. Or ideas of getting revenge against the boss who just fired you. Or perhaps toying with mischievous ideas that spring from your mind's eye to seek revenge on your ex-spouse. Or ways to have revenge on someone who just heckled you on social media, Twitter, or Facebook. However, Jesus warned us that even fantasizing about revenge can give birth to actions and bad decisions which can lead to our destruction. Not that life imitates art, but there is a film that reflects Jesus' concern about making bad decisions after harboring revenge fantasies. Anyone seen Monster-in-Law with Jane Fonda and Jennifer Lopez? It's a funny film, sort of, but in the film, Jane does not like the woman her son is marrying, feeling that Jennifer Lopez is stealing her son. So in a scene where Jane and Jennifer are having a pleasant conversation over tea, Jane fantasizes about having her revenge by pushing her daughter's, soon-to-be daughter-in-law's face into a cake. As the movie progresses, Jane's revenge fantasies negatively affect her outward behavior. To avoid having revenge fantasies, which can lead to harm, Jesus directed his followers toward a different way of living and operating. In this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus reframed the desire for seeking revenge or ensuring the wrongdoer got what he or she deserved by instructing his followers to seek redemption for the wrongdoer. After all, revenge is about making ourselves feel good or superior to the one who hurt us. This is why many who seek revenge use Moses' law to justify their acts of vengeance, claiming vengeance is mine, claiming they are justified to demand an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. However, Moses' law was established to create a limit of severity when punishing wrongdoers. The law set limits so that no more pain or no more harm was inflicted on the wrongdoer than was received by the victim. However, over time, the saying an eye for an eye became twisted, so it became a requirement to punish wrongdoers. The problem with this view, as Jesus highlighted, is that instead of seeing each other as fellow residents on a journey of faith in God, this type of tit-for-tat retribution treats life as transactional instead of holy. Each person is paid back, lash for lash and tooth for tooth. And this misinterpretation of Moses' law neglects to offer mercy, and it fails to see the holy face of God in every person. Jesus' instructions didn't overrule the law of Moses. Rather, Jesus wanted his followers to live into the spirit of the law. He called us to lean into the hard work of forgiving and redeeming the person who caused us harm. Instead of indulging in revenge fantasies, Jesus encouraged us to live the vision of God's offer of love and redemption for all people. He said, when someone strikes you, turn to them the other cheek. Now, some argue that Jesus' commands are foolish and unrealistic. They argue that Jesus' instructions essentially turn his disciples into doormats to be walked over by evil people. However, for those who follow Jesus' commands, they understand that these lessons are not for the weak. Further, his teachings foreshadowed what would be required of him on the cross. As one commentator pointed out, Jesus' death was not the act of a lamb going meekly to the slaughter, but rather the act of one who embodied his own teachings. To be nonviolent and not to indulge in revenge fantasies is tough work. It seems almost human nature to strike back after being struck. However, to follow Jesus' instructions, it takes willpower to respond with violence, with nonviolence. And following Jesus' ways takes patience. Sure, Jesus' way won't make for the type of action-packed blockbuster films we're used to, but Jesus' way is powerful enough for any hero. Jesus taught, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for your persecutors." Tell Charlie later, would you? "Love those unlikely to be loved. Love the poor. Love the coworker. Love the person least like you." This is the love of God, and this is the love God extends to us. Loving and being nonviolent toward those who will prove that you are the children of God. It takes strength to be a non-aggressive because it's easier to hold grudges than it is to forgive. It's easier to strike out and cause harm to the oppressor than to place your body in harm's way. Turning the other cheek takes courage and strength, not weakness. Walter Wink, author of The Powers That Be, explained that turning the other cheek is not an act of pacifism, as many have been taught. Instead, turning the other cheek is a form of nonviolent resistance. In the first century, under Roman occupation, Jesus' audience would have known firsthand the experience of being cuffed by the backhand of their oppressors. The typical options in the face of this violence were cowering submission or violent retaliation. To maintain one's position and offer one's left cheek creates in the cultural and political context of the time a dilemma for the oppressor. By turning the other cheek, the oppressor was unable to use their backhand. Backhanding with the left hand was a social blunder used only by weaklings. And punching the target meant the oppressor and the oppressed were equal in status. This act of defiance rendered the oppressor incapable of asserting their dominance. And by turning the other cheek, the inferior is saying, "I'm a human being, just like you. I refuse to be humiliated any longer. I am your equal. I won't take it anymore." Jesus' way is a creative, nonviolent resistance that does not indulge in revenge, but lives the vision God desired. God wanted us to seek nonviolence so we don't dish out to offenders what they deserve. After all, this is not how God has dealt with us. Instead of punishing and giving us what we deserve, God has remained patient and given us a chance to reform our errors. And since God has given us an opportunity to be redeemed, then it's reasonable that God will give our enemies an opportunity to be redeemed as well. Because from their perspective, we are the enemy. Instead of being an avenger, we can embody the lesson Jesus gave us when He overcame evil with suffering love, when He overcame evil with good. Jesus demonstrated nonviolent resistance, and His example has been repeated throughout the ages. His peaceful example is repeated by Mahatma Gandhi to defeat the British. In Denmark, thousands of Danes resisted their Nazi oppressors without using violence, and yet saved thousands of Jews by using a general strike to thwart the expansion of the occupation. Rosa Parks began a movement of nonviolent actions with bus boycotts, lunch counter sit-ins, and peaceful marches that have changed the nation. Jesus said, "The acts of nonviolence, protest, can shame your oppressor while also disarming them." Well, thinking about this disarming, I'm reminded of the protest that took place in Cairo, Egypt. In 2006, hundreds of Egyptians began to fill the streets calling for the dictator to resign. Now, we know in some places there was a lot of violence, but in one particular neighborhood, the people were simply shouting, and they had their signs, and they weren't creating a disturbance in their own neighborhood. They weren't trashing it, in other words. And they weren't being violent, even though they were met with rubber bullets and tear gas. And even though the rest of the city looked like a war zone, this one neighborhood filled with protesters were doing it nonviolently. Yet, several officers dressed in riot gear entered that neighborhood and began using their batons to beat several men. Unexpectedly, none of the protesters reacted violently. Instead, old men and old women left the safety of their homes and stood in front of the victims, using their bodies as shields. As the number of peaceful protesters swelled, the officers began to retreat. But the one who had just been smashing protesters tripped and was disarmed. Two young men, about the same age as the officer, rushed over. One picked up the officer's baton while the other one picked up his helmet and shield. And they helped the officer to his feet, brushed him off, and then handed the items back to the officer, saying, "We're just like you. Join us, brother." Even though the two protesters had just seen the officer beat their friends, family members, and neighbors, they responded with compassion and kindness. It's unknown what went through the officer's mind, but it was reported later that night near the neighborhood in an area where the officers had regrouped. The officers were commanded to throw smoke grenades into the crowd. It was caught on film that several officers held the smoke grenades in front of them at the crowd, and then at the moment they were supposed to throw them, tossed them harmlessly behind their shoulder. Coincidence? It's likely that the acts of kindness displayed earlier that evening led to this act of nonviolence among the officers. And it may make no sense, but when violence is met with nonviolence, generosity and helpfulness, it stands a good chance of leading to God's kingdom and God's vision. It stands a good chance of revealing God's grace and God's presence. Following Jesus' instructions is not easy. It takes courage and determination. It takes willpower and the ability to remain firm in one's convictions no matter what. But a 61-year-old Vietnam Army veteran, Wilbur Hilton of Flint, Michigan, who traveled to North Dakota to peacefully protest the pipeline, said, "Nonviolence will make the difference, and we will remain nonviolent no matter what." He added, "The power of peaceful protest is that people are confounded and don't know what to do when you refuse to give up nonviolence as your main approach." As we are all aware, we have the option to flee, the option to resist with violence and protest using ways that damage relationships and often ourselves. Or we can choose Jesus' approach, which allows us to resist ideas and protest using peace and courage. And we can help the oppressor to view us as an equal, as their brother or their sister. And thus we can see God's presence in the life of each other. Jesus' form of nonviolent resistance allows us to be equals so we can listen and strive to understand each other's views. And Jesus taught that instead of indulging in wild revenge fantasies or seeking vengeance, we can handle situations a different way. He said we can focus on loving others as God loves them and as God loves us. Well, it's unlikely we've ever seen an action-packed film that emphasized Jesus' teachings about peace through nonviolence. But I wonder, the next time we sit at the movies, what if the hero seeking vengeance handled the situation as a disciple of Christ? How would the scene change? How would the hero change? And what would happen if the hero had courage to live as Jesus lived? And I wonder, how would our lives be changed if we dared to live as Christ lived? How would situations be different for us if we were truly keepers of the peace? When facing danger or opposition, do you have the courage of Jesus?